breaker for a buyer. Now this can totally range depending on your buyer. So some buyers will find certain things be deal breakers where others won't see that as an issue. For example, there might be some covenants in the neighborhood, in a single family home neighborhood, where fences can only be 3 feet tall. And it's about the aesthetics of the neighborhood. And for a lot of people, that's like totally fine. Some people want more privacy than that. Or they have dogs that can jump over a 3-foot fence. And that's just a deal breaker, just flat out deal breaker. Nothing you can do to change it. You can't salvage the contract, can't negotiate anything if it's something in the covenants or the HOA docs for that area. So that could be something that's just a deal breaker for somebody. And so finding those out as soon as you can, sometimes it doesn't come out until they read it or you discover it and they find out. They're like, oh, wait a minute, that's not going to work for me. So other examples could be that they raise their own chickens for eggs and such. And a lot of HOAs, neighborhoods, covenants don't allow that because they don't want to hear roosters or the noise of chickens and chicken coops in people's backyards. They might also have an issue with having a garden in the front yard. So sometimes people have a very tiny backyard and the only place they can have a garden would be in the front yard. And that, of course, affects curb appeal and the neighborhood as well. So for looking through those covenants, very important to see if there's any deal breakers specific to your buyer. Now, there are other deal breakers that are real deal breakers for most buyers, as opposed to really being specific to a buyer. And for one example would be insurance. What if you cannot get flood insurance and you're in the flood zone? That could be a deal breaker for somebody because they want to be insured, especially if they are in a flood zone. Another one is wildfires. I live in Colorado. We have a bunch of wildfires out in this whole western half of the US. And if you cannot qualify for wildfire insurance, do you really want to spend $500,000 on a house that if it burns up in flames, you walk away with nothing? So those are some things that could be a real deal breaker. Now, for some people, it might be a small cabin out in the woods and it's not that big of a deal. But those are things you really want to make sure you look at those deadlines, check in with your client, and also find out whether that insurance is a big deal. And sometimes it's just that the insurance is really expensive, where it becomes cost prohibitive to even buy the home. Same with flood insurance. So other things you want to help your buyer look for that are deal breakers generally for everyone would be a bad odor. So there are a lot of smells in people's homes. If it's coming from a dog and your buyers are dogs, they may not even notice that smell. But a lot of times the dog smell can be removed. You can clean very well, clean the walls, clean the floors, depending what it is. If it's just from pet dander and such, you can even clean out the vents for your HVAC system. If it's a cat and it peed, that could be a little bit harder to get rid of. So you want to look at the odors. Now, what if it's like a moldy, musty odor? So sometimes you go into the basement in Boulder. We had a huge flood in 2013. Sometimes when you go below grade and you can smell a bit of a musty smell. And that could be because they had flooding during that flood or other times. It doesn't have to be from a flood. It could be from your hot water heater breaking and you're not realizing that the basement's flooded for a couple of days and it gets that musty smell from that water sitting around. So those are signs that you want to kind of explore what happened or why it smells musty. And for some people, it could be a deal breaker. If one of the kids has to live in the basement and it smells weird, musty, old, or whatever, then that might be an issue that they're just like, I'm out. Those are smells that you want to. Another possible deal breaker for your buyer could be the maintenance issues. If there are a ton of maintenance issues coming up, and maybe they passed inspection, like the inspector goes out on the roof and goes, you got 5 years left in that roof, so it's solid. You wouldn't do anything with it now because it's got 5 years life left. But that also means for the new buyer, in 5 years, you might be spending $10,000 on a new roof or patching up the roof or whatever issues it needs. And so those are some upcoming maintenance costs that may make it prohibitive for them to actually buy the home. Now, sometimes the inspector walks the roof and they're like, there are saggy bits in that roof. It's like, whoop. And so those are kind of like the scary roofs. And so it's not that it has 5 years, it has 0 years left. In fact, it's past due. But that can also be a sign that there's other infrastructure issues in the attic space or wherever the roof comes in, that there might be water damage, that you might need to replace a lot more than just the roof. And there might be mold and such up there. And so you might need mold mitigation. And all of a sudden there's a lot of issues that could be coming up, and that may be cost prohibitive. It might be something you put on the inspection objection that you have the sellers fix before closing. But even that might be too much for them. They may not be able to afford to or want to, and it could just kill the deal. Any kind of structural issue tends to be a bit of a deal breaker for most people. Some people are not as scared if they know what's entailed in a structural fix, but those can be very expensive. And sometimes when you fix something like lift part of the house up to make it even where it was and add the foundation underneath, of course, a big renovation like that, sometimes other things pop up that you find out something wrong with the plumbing or the sewer line. Sewer line doesn't flow right anymore, and so all of a sudden more costs come up. Now, another example, so for a deal breaker, I've had buyers even say, you know, I don't want to move twice and my lease is up at the end of the month, so I want to be in the house by then. And well, a lot of times the seller also is looking to buy a replacement home. They need to go somewhere when they leave. And nobody wants to have to move twice. It just sucks. It costs money, it's inconvenient, you have to figure out where a temporary place would be to live. Well, as an agent, you can help your clients with that if necessary. And sometimes when you're putting your offer in, if you are specific about that, and if you ask the listing agent and the sellers are really, they're waiting for a new build to finish, and it's going to need a rent back system or something, so that post occupancy for them until their home is built, and it's another 20 days. And if your buyer's like, nope, that's the deal breaker for me, it might be a deal breaker for them. But sometimes find out how much they really want that home. Because sometimes they'll be like, oh, I'm going to lose the offer to another offer for $20,000 less because they're willing to let them stay for 20 days. They might change their mind about that being a deal breaker. Maybe it's not so much of a deal breaker as they thought. So you want to really work with your clients and kind of get a feel for that. And even if you see that situation, really warn them, like, hey, are you really serious about not wanting to move twice? Because the sellers would have to move twice, and maybe they're seniors, and that's even a bigger deal for them, especially we went through a pandemic. So you might lose the house. And so, you know, get them to feel what that would feel like to lose the house over this, and whether it's really a deal breaker or if it's really a high need want, but not necessarily that they want to lose the house over it. Another example would be if your client is working in the sustainability business, and then you find out the home, the seller is currently getting checks from some mining company, whether it's from fracking or from extracting the minerals, and they get a monthly check or annual check or whatever it happens to be. And the buyer would be getting that with the sale of the home. That might violate their whole ethical code within their business if they're running a sustainability business, and it might just look really bad for them. So something to take a look out for, depending on what their job is, whether something about the home would just not mix with their values. So those are some examples of deal breakers and not such a deal breaker. So it's really reading about your client, understanding your client, and knowing what really is a deal breaker and what you can really change and not change.